Hello, welcome to the May webcast for Emily's Walking Book Club. I'm Emily Rhodes, and the book this month is Death and the Penguin by Andrey Kurkov. It's been a really special month for Emily's Walking Book Club, with not one but two walks, one of which was as part of the Daunt Books Festival. It was great to be back. We walked through a very wet and soggy Regent's Park, as well as our usual Sunday Hampstead Heath walk, and we had our Monday evening Zoom. And all these three walks were fundraisers for Ukraine, with all the money from ticket sales going towards the DEC Ukraine humanitarian appeal. I'm so glad to say that we've raised £420. So that's actually quite a lot of money that together we raised. And even those of us who couldn't donate, thank you so much for reading along. Because not only was the idea to raise money for Ukraine, but also to raise awareness about Ukraine and the cultural history and past of this country that is going through such an appalling time. We all found that not only did we love this book, it really helped us gain a deeper understanding of the situation in Ukraine. So I urge you to read it. It's a really important time to read this book. So, Death and the Penguin, what do you think of the title? Interesting question, because as was revealed on this brilliant episode of the BBC World Book Club, which features Andrey Kurkov himself talking about the book, the original title in Russian, yes, it was written in Russian, although he is a Ukrainian author, he writes in Russian. It's a bit of a contentious issue. The title in Russian is Death of an Outsider. And when it was translated into German, the German title was Picnic on the Ice, which comes from an absolutely brilliant scene in the book. When it came to be translated into English, which has been done really beautifully by George Bird, they decided to call it Death and the Penguin. And in French, it's just called The Penguin. So, what is it about this title that is thought to appeal to an English language readership so much? And actually on the walks, we did a bit of a poll to see everyone's favourite title. And 95% of us went with Death and the Penguin. So it was definitely the correct decision, although there were a few who were keen on Picnic on the Ice. One thing that I think the Penguin and also Picnic on the Ice capture, sorry, not the title, The Penguin, but the penguin itself, is this brilliant ability of Kurkov to take something quite normal. So the penguin in the book is a real penguin. It's a pet. Victor, who is our protagonist, takes him in, decides to buy him from the zoo. Takes him from the zoo. The zoo is giving away all the penguins to anyone who can feed them, all the animals to anyone who can feed them, and he decides to take a penguin and he keeps it as his pet. And there's a lot in the book that feels very familiar to anyone who has a pet, talking about feeding it, hearing its little footfalls through the flat, has a little cuddle with him, stroking its head. So it's this very familiar thing which we can all relate to, but it's about a penguin. And similarly with the picnic on the ice, this idea of a picnic, we love picnics. It's a very kind of familiar thing, but I certainly think of picnics as being a summer thing, in a sort of meadow somewhere, not on the ice. And so in both these instances, I feel Kurkov takes quite an ordinary, mundane idea, like a pet or a picnic, and turns it on its head, somehow makes it totally extraordinary, totally alien and unfamiliar. And this kind of doubleness of it being both familiar and alien feels very uncanny. And I think it sets up the world to be one that is, seemingly knowable and known, but actually unknown and unknowable, and kind of frightening and uncanny. And there's a possibility that although that anything could happen, that this place that you might recognize, you might think you actually don't. So I'm just going to read from the start. I'm just going to mention here that I love the way this book is in such short chapters. I love a short chapter. So look, here's chapter 1. I'm going to read the whole of chapter 1, which takes us just to there. And chapter 2 is even shorter. So I found it very easy to get into this book because, you know, the pace was really good and there were lots of breaks. So it's not a very sophisticated point. Okay. First, a stone landed a metre from Victor's foot. He glanced back. 2 louts stood grinning, one of whom stooped, picked up another from a section of broken cobble, and bowled it at him skittler fashion. Victor made off at something approaching a racing walk and rounded the corner, telling himself the main thing was not to run. He paused outside his block, glancing up at the hanging clock. 9 o'clock. Not a sound. No one about. He went in, now no longer afraid. They found life dull, ordinary people, now that entertainment was beyond their means, so they bowled cobbles. As he turned on the kitchen light, it went off again. They had cut the power just like that. And in the darkness, he became aware of the unhurried footfalls of Misha the penguin. Misha had appeared chez Victor a year before when the zoo was giving hungry animals away to anyone able to feed them. Victor had gone along and returned with a king penguin. Abandoned by his girlfriend the week before, he had been feeling lonely. But Misha had brought his own kind of loneliness, and the result was now 2 complementary lonelinesses, creating an impression more of interdependence than of amity. Unearthing a candle, he lit it and stood it on the table in an empty mayonnaise pot. The poetic insouciance of the tiny light sent him to look in the semi-darkness for pen and paper. He sat down at the table with the paper between him and the candle, paper asking to be written on. Had he been a poet, rhyme would have raced across the white, but he wasn't. He was trapped in a rut between journalism and meagre scraps of prose. Short stories were the best that he could do. Very short. Too short to make a living from, even if he got paid for them. A shot rang out. Darting to the window, Victor pressed his face to the glass. Nothing. He returned to his sheet of paper. Already he had thought up a story around that shot. A single side was all it took, no more, no less. And as his latest short story drew to its tragic close, the power came back on, and the ceiling bulb blazed. Blowing out the candle, he fetched Coley from the freezer for Misha's bowl. So I think you can see straight away the familiarity of the pet penguin, you know, the unhurried footfalls, the fetching Coley from the freezer for his bowl, and also the weirdness of it being a penguin called Misha. There's also, you know, this world where a shot just rings out, where the power can be just switched off. But this is somehow, you know, sparks creativity in Victor. And it also brings up loneliness here. You know, Victor's loneliness and Misha's loneliness. And loneliness feels absolutely crucial to this book, so at its heart. And in fact, I mean, I'm going to admit that I would never have got this had I not listened to Kurkov explain this on the BBC book club. The penguin, he chose a penguin rather than any other animal for the pet. Not just because, you know, they're sweet little penguins who potter about on 2 feet, but because penguins are a kind of pack animal. They live in a herd, and when they're alone, separate from the rest of the penguins, they're totally lost and miserable. And he thought this was a really good metaphor for Ukrainian people after the Soviets had kind of gone. So I thought it was really interesting thinking about the positive side of Soviet rule, that there's this collectivity, this sort of doing things together, rather, and when that goes, it leaves a real loneliness behind, that people as individuals can't manage, aren't really kitted out cope when they're on their own. So yeah, so lots to think about there. We thought a lot about Victor and his loneliness, and Misha's loneliness, and the other characters in the book. There are these amazing friendships that bloom from nothing, where so much is given, sort of places to stay, final wishes, absolute loyalty, and whatever is asked of you is given, but from someone who a second before was a stranger. So we talked about that kind of friendship and how vulnerable that friendship is. So many of the characters in the book disappear or die. And we also talked a little bit about the strange family that, Victor kind of inadvertently builds when he takes in a little girl and starts sleeping with the nanny he takes in, and they have the pet penguin Misha, and it's the little girl Sonia draws a picture, and the nanny kind of crosses out the names and puts mum and dad in, and so you're really made to think of it as this kind of strange version of a nuclear family. And so we talked about families, and actually I looked up the root of the word family, and actually, interestingly, when it was first used, family was used to refer to the members of staff of a household, so the servants, rather than, who you would think of as being the family of the house, if you see what I mean. So it's not the mum and dad and the kids, it's their servants, their staff. And I wondered if there was something in this idea of serving each other, serving people, being so deeply rooted in the idea of a family that was somehow being brought into play in this book. There's a really complicated moral world of the book. It's such a strange morality. It's so totally different to life, in London today. Sorry, I just need to press that. Hang on. And we had a really good discussion about morality. Of course, we ended up talking about Nazi Germany and this idea of just going along with it, not asking too many questions. But how that when we look at Germans and under the Nazis who went along with it and didn't question it, it's very hard to forgive them and not judge them badly for that. When Victor makes that same decision to not ask too many questions and just kind of get on with it, we don't really criticise him. I feel like judgment is held back. And that made many of us on the wall feel quite uncomfortable. I think this whole book can make the reader feel quite uncomfortable. I also think this book is really funny in places. We all talked about how we laughed at moments. And we thought about how often when, the bigger situation, the world is in such a terrible place, all you can do is laugh, and humour is kind of how you get through it. So yeah, lots to say in this book. I urge you to read it. And if you have read it, let me know what you think. Leave a comment. I always love hearing your thoughts. And there is a sequel, by the way. So the sequel is called Penguin Lost, and if you really love this book, you might want to find out what happens next, because it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger. Thank you.